absolutely no hatred towards anyone. I just never understood hatred, how people could hate other people for whatever reason, because they're of a different religion or they're a different color or whatever. I just could never understand that question at all. And are you supposed to be with me on this question? But when we watch people commit suicide, as I told you earlier, during that time, we were numb. We didn't know what to even think about it. We all felt that eventually all of us will die there and that there's no way that we will survive. I have to tell you, when I decided to run out of that line and try to escape, I was certain then that I had no chance to succeed. And you know, I had a friend of mine that I met in that camp and with whom I spent all my time in that camp. We worked together at the same place. We stayed in the same barrack. His name was David. David and I were together all the time. And when I decided to escape, David was the only person that I talked about it. And I said to him, that was, by the way, during the march. And I said to David, David, I decided that I'm going to run out of this line and try to escape. David looked at me and he said to me, you must be out of your mind. How can you think even of doing it? You don't have a chance in a million to succeed. I said to David, what difference does it really make if I die now or a little later? Well, David didn't want to do it. After the war was over, I met a person that was in that same death march. And I was very anxious to know if by any chance he knew David. He said, isn't it strange that you're asking me about David? David and I were right next to each other in that march. And when you ran out of that line, David said to me, my friend Sam just ran out of this line, and I am certain that he's no longer alive. After I asked him, do you by any chance know what happened to David? David died less than an hour later.
I'm sure you're aware of the fact that my experience was nowhere near as horrible as Sam's. We got out just in time to avoid the experience of the concentration camps. If we had stayed behind, if it had taken the American authorities a few months longer to make up their minds, then I'm sure I would have had the same fate as, well, chances are I would have gotten killed, the whole family. So we barely got out just in time. That left its mark on me, very definitely. And I feel an obligation, having avoided the worst part of the Holocaust, have always felt an obligation to tell people what happened during the Holocaust and to warn people about the dangers of hatred. And this is why I spend a lot of time, talking to groups and so forth. The question of, well, what could we do, that came up earlier before. You must realize that when Hitler came to power, 65 million Germans did not become 65 million murderers. They became 65 million bystanders. People who knew what was happening, most of them probably did not approve of what their government was doing and other people, but they chose not to do anything about it. They chose to look the other way and forget about it. Why would they do that? Well, let's look at ourselves. Right now, there are all kinds of bad things going on in the world, some right in our own country. Are we doing anything about it if it doesn't affect our immediate family? We are being bystanders. Now, of course, there were thousands of Germans who were involved in the actual killing. I don't understand that. I never could, I never will, how people can kill so many people, including little kids, little babies, that they know absolutely nothing about. They're complete strangers, and yet they are willing to kill these people. It's impossible to understand this. But what allowed them to do this was the fact that millions of people knew about it and did nothing about it, and didn't want to take a chance on themselves getting into danger. So the most important thing that you can do when you go out into the world after you get your education is to realize the danger of being a bystander, and to make sure that when you know of something unfair, brutal happening to people, you've got to get involved. This is the lesson of the Holocaust, of Holocaust history.
I just would like to add something to this. If my family had known that something like that was going to happen, I can assure you we would have left that country long, long before.
Thank you. Carson, we actually have time for about 2 more questions. So, Philip, there's one on your card. Would you like to address that, or would you like to give some information? Okay. Very well. The question is, did either of you ever go back after you came to America? What did you find, and what is Germany like today?
Would like to have another hour to discuss that one particular question. I have been back 10 times, 9 times going back to my old hometown of Constance. Once I went to Berlin, the capital of Germany. I mentioned before that Constance was one of the better cities in Germany in terms of their reactions to the Nazi policies. I was very happy in one of my first visits back to Constance to renew my friendship with the kids I went to school with, except they weren't kids anymore, they're now old men. But they were decent in spite of what was said to them, in spite of all the hateful propaganda that they were subjected to. And I appreciated that. The last visit back to Constance was about 2.5, almost 3 years ago, when an organization called Initiative Stolpersteine decided to, it's an organization that sprang up all around Germany to remind people of the people who used to live there, the Jewish people who no longer live there. And they install plaques in the sidewalk in front of buildings, houses, where Jewish people used to live. Jewish people who either were forced to leave the country or, in most cases, who were killed by their own German government. And